What's up everybody, Teancum here with Sew Yeah Quilting. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how you make this fat quarter friendly jumbo quilt block. Let's get started. So the supplies that you're going to need from this project is super simple. First, grab 8 fat quarters here. I'll show you what I've got going on here. This is a Moda line called Speckled, or it's Sparkle, can't remember now, Speckled, by Ruby Star Society. I've got my 8 fat quarters there, along with 1 3/4 yards of black, and truly, if I was going to do this again, I would get 2 yards of fabric. That way I had a little bit more leeway, but I'll throw that down like so. Now let's get into the cutting instructions. Now that we've gone over all the supplies that we need, let's jump right on into the cutting instructions. First thing you're going to need is grab your fat quarters, open them up, and if they're good enough to start cutting, start cutting. If you need to iron, go ahead and start ironing. What we need to cut out of this is a 13-inch square, and with the remaining, we're going to cut 2.5-inch squares for our binding. Something that you might not have caught, we have a scrappy binding all the way around. That way we use up as much as possible. First thing I'm going to do though here is you want to cut it so your binding strips are as long as possible. I'm going to turn it this direction. That way I have my 20-inch length here. I'm going to cut out my 13 by 13 block, and then I'll get some nice 2.5-inch strips from there. Let me go ahead and put this right here on my mat. I'm going to square up my edge. Perfect. Grab a rotary cutter. This is like a magical place that has everything that we need, which is nice. And literally I'm just shaving off a little hair here to make sure it is pretty straight. It looks like I got a little nick in this. Want to make sure everything lines up nice and straight. There it goes. So nice and straight there. I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom edge. That way I know 100% I have a nice square starting point. And guys, itty bitty scrap there. Nothing that you can really use unless you're stuffing dog beds or something like that. From there, I'm going to go over 13 inches. And make my cut. Now that I have this sitting here, I'm going to move my 13-inch strip here. I'm going to go ahead and cut off as many 2.5-inch strips as I can get from here. So I'm going to go to right here, cut off my first strip. And here goes my second strip. So, got 2 strips for my binding. Just set all these strips aside. And let's get back to my 13-inch strip here. I'm going to turn it the other direction. Line it up and make sure this is a 13-inch square. That was almost a crooked 13-inch square. Let's make sure it's nice and straight. Now this next part is kind of up to you. You can figure out a way to use this into the block. Maybe you want to cut out some more strips here. One thing that you could do just as a something else, you could cut these into like maybe 3-inch strips and border your quilt all the way around. Just an idea there. But what I'm going to do with this piece is, since it's still a nice piece, I'm going to fold it up and save it for another project. We're going to repeat this step to all of our colored fat quarters. That way we have 13 by 13 blocks and our 2.5 by 2.5-inch binding strips. Go ahead and do that, and let's get right on to the next step. Now that I've cut out all my 13-inch squares along with my 2.5-inch strips for my binding, I'm going to set all my binding strips aside and focus on these. Now, One more step is grab your black fabric and cut it into 8 13 by 13 squares to match our squares here. I'm not going to go into how to cut that. You've seen how we've done it to the fat quarters, same method. From here though, this is something where people, it's hard to follow this, but just trust me on this. What we have to do next is we need to cut these into triangles. And everyone's going to say, well, don't you know the half square triangle method on how to get 2 out of a square? Yes, I do. You have to do it this way though. The reason being is, and again, I'm going to cut it all the way across. The reason being is I need 2 different colored half square triangles. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I need a green and a blue. If we sewed both of these together and cut them, I would have 2 green and blues. In reality, I need a green, a blue, and a green and a black. That way I can get more out of each cut. You'll see what I'm talking about here in just one second. But I'm going to go ahead and, since I've cut these, move these aside. I'm going to do it to my blacks here as well. And you're going to do this to all of your 13-inch squares. Let me cut that. And we can now begin sewing once we've done it to all of our squares. To sew them together, we have to think about how we want the entire block to look now. Since we're only doing a singular block, make sure it looks good. Which 2 colors do you want together? Maybe you want your purple and your blue together, or your green and your blue, so on and so forth. Because this is the framework of your entire block here. Once you know that, you'll need to put your 2 colors together, and then make a single color with a black of each of the colors. So let me show you how we're doing that. I'm going to start off with my green here, because I already know I'm going to need a green and black square. I'm going to lay them right sides together. And I'm going to sew all the way down. Since they are triangles instead of squares, you do have to be very careful with your bias edge here. It does want to stretch a little bit. Just let the sewing machine take the fabric and do its job. So, now it's time to sew on the next one here. And this is the one that I'm going to add the color to, but just so you guys can kind of see what's going on here, got my greens and my black. Now I need to add a secondary color to this, which will be my blue, just like what you see behind me. And we're going to use the same method. We're going to put them right sides together. Let the sewing machine do all the work for us today. Which gives me my next piece here. Now, at home, go ahead and figure out the orientation that you want to put all your blocks in and sew the rest of your pieces all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and iron this. Pull out my ironing mat here. And I'm going to iron it to whichever side is darker. So on this case, my green is actually a little bit darker than my blue. So when I flip this over like so, I'm going to push my seam this direction. That way it hides it the best as possible. Again, nice and easy here. Give it a nice, good press. And yes, before someone asks, technically, if you wanted to, you could also open up this seam. Let me pull that out a little bit. Like so. And it will give you the same result. Which that right there would be an open seam. I prefer just going all in one direction. Little ironing tip there. Okay. Now that you have it iron all of your pieces, all of them. All right, guys, make sure you take that step that way. Make sure you take that step that way. Everything comes out really nice and square. From here, it's time to do a little bit of trim up on our blocks. This right here is a 12.5 by 12.5 inch ruler, which happens to be the exact size I want this to be in the end. And as you can see here, I'm lining up my diagonal line, make sure everything's square, and there's just the slightest fuzz all the way around that we need to trim up, which is what I will do right now. So two sides, gonna turn it all the way around to do it to the other two sides. Very, very little here to trim off. And repeat this step to all of your half square triangles. So now that we've sewn our half square triangles, it's now time to assemble our blocks. I know that sounds weird because it's a block quilt, but essentially our block are these 4 squares here sewn together. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So the first thing we're going to do, hope I have enough room on my mat here, is you want to make sure you get the right angle here, just like so that it points out like a star. Same thing here. Like so. This is the only square that's cut a little bit different because it's 12.5 inches instead of 13. The reason being is since we've sewn these blocks down and trimmed them down to 12.5, we need that matching block. I've already gone ahead and cut out my block here. I even got my little paper on it that says it's 12.5 inches. Now it's time to sew this together, making one square. What I like to do is start from top or bottom to top. So I'm going to sew these two together, and then my rows together. Put these together like so. Make sure you're sewing on the right side, that way you don't have to unpick or take out your seams. So first one down, I'm going to now sew this one to this one. That's what I'm talking about. You make a fatal move here and then we're having to unpick. There it is. From here, we're going to sew both of these together. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just give this a nice finger press. Make sure my seam is set in there real nice and neat. Do the same thing to this side here. If you want to take it to the ironing board, you can, but just so I can get the seam set into place. Now the main crucial part here is to make sure your center seam, or where all 4 are coming together, lines up. So I've got a little pin right here. Take the extra minute, put those together right, give it a pin, that way you know you are on track. Next step, back to the ironing board. You want to make sure all your seams are laying down how you want them. Mine are a little bit funky here because I showed you how to open that one. So you're going to see different methods here all being used all at the same time. So I want to push these this way on this one. Again, I'm just always pushing as much as I can to that dark edge or that dark side. Which from here, you can see I've got 1/4 of my quilt done. Now we're going to repeat the same process for the other 4 sides, and let me show you how you put it all together. So just due to how big this block is, it's not really a good way to show it with all the different angles here, but essentially you can see here, I got my 2 big blocks here. I'm going to lay them right sides together, like so. Again, that center seam or that center point of your seam is the most important part. Make sure that lines up. Take that extra second to line them up. And we're going to do this both to the top row and the bottom row. Make sure you're pretty much on point here and go ahead and sew it. And that's on the floor. Now that we sewed 2 of the 4 pieces together on both top and bottom, it's now time to join them in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, same thing here, right sides together. Gotta find a couple of wonder clips here, which I have now. And not only is the middle seam now really important, but these side block seams are also important. So take the extra second, line those up really nice and well. Put a clip or a pin, does not matter. So the next step here is, now that I pinned and made sure I'm lined up, take it right on over to your sewing machine. Line everything up if you've moved it a little bit. What I try to do is keep the bulk of my project still on the desk while I get my first couple of stitches in. So I just finished sewing my last seam here, and let me show you guys what it's looking like. Now this is a super fun and awesome quilt to make, and it's not a super time-consuming quilt either. But to finish off, you have a bunch of different options here. You can cut out of the black fabric a couple more strips and border it, like I did right here behind me. These are 3-inch strips. Or you do have that little excess piece from your fat quarter that you could cut up and border it in a scrappy-like border, which I think would make a really, really nice addition to it. But whatever way you choose to finish it off, go ahead and do that. And what I'm going to do is take this across the building to our in-house long armor to have it long armed. Thank you again, guys, for joining me today. And my name's Teancum, teaching you how to sew like a pro. We'll see you here next week at Sew Yeah Quilting. If it rains outside, why don't sheep shrink? Because wool does. Wonders of the world.